Alright, how's it going, y'all? Today we're going to be going over how to install TrueNAS Core 12, which is currently in Release Candidate 1, basically means it's good enough for home users, on a Dell PowerEdge R630 that I've got. So this install process should work for just about any computer. However, I'm going to be using Idrac, which makes it pretty easy and I don't have to plug in a keyboard or mouse to set this up. Alright, so in my last video I went over what TrueNAS is and what kind of performance it can give you. And at the end of it I said I'd be doing a full rip and replace of my R630 FreeNAS build, which I've been using for video editing. And so that's what I've done. I'm going to go through and install TrueNAS 12, which I'm really excited for because it promises huge single user SMB gains, which are really important for me. So this video is going to go over setting it up for the very first time and creating VDEVs. Then from there, I'm also going to be creating a bunch of other tutorials. So go ahead and leave any other tutorials you'd like to see me make, especially TrueNAS ones, in the comments below. All right, so IX Systems has actually put together a pretty good hardware build guide for TrueNAS 12 Core. And so go ahead and check that. But really all you're going to need is a 64-bit CPU, at least 8 gigs of RAM. I'd recommend at least 16 gigs. A USB or an SSD to actually install TrueNAS on. I'm going to be doing this on a USB. It is not the most resilient build. However, it's not too big of a deal because I've got it set up to back up automatically. Plus, TrueNAS has very few writes to the actual operating system media, as the entire operating system on boot up is loaded directly into RAM. And finally after that, you're going to need some disks to install it to. Alright, so for this build, I'm using these 1 terabyte SSDs, which are only about $98 on Amazon. It's an awesome deal, and they're actually really good. So SK Hynix is actually one of the largest producers of SSDs, and so they just started producing their own. And they're really cheap, especially given how much performance you can get out of them, and so I would highly recommend them. I'll go ahead and leave an Amazon affiliate link to them down below. I would highly recommend them. I keep purchasing them every time I've got a storage upgrade or have a little bit of extra money running around. And so for this, I've got 4 of them that I'm going to be setting up in RAID Z1 and then going from there. All right, and so the first thing you're going to need to do is download the TrueNAS Core ISO file from their website, and I'll leave a link to that in the description, and then create boot media of it on a USB drive, which I've already done here. If you don't know how to do this, I'll go ahead and leave a link in the description, and I might go over it in a future tutorial. However, every operating system is going to have to do it differently, and it's overall pretty easy to set up, especially on a Mac with Terminal. All right, and so now I'm going to go ahead and go downstairs and plug this in, and I've got everything else already set up, and we're going to go through the process. All right, and so now I've logged into Idrac, and I've already booted up my server. And so this is awesome about Idrac, which comes on Dell servers with the Idrac license, that actually gives you keyboard, mouse, and monitor view straight from a web browser, meaning you don't have to set up a monitor or anything, and it's really nice to have. Though it is definitely a little bit finicky. Sometimes you're going to have to refresh the page to get it to work right. All right, and so now I'm going to go in and go into Boot Manager, which is F11. This is the same setup for anyone, and also make sure that your BIOS are all updated. So you can probably hear it now. That is spinning up and it is loud. All right, and so now we're going to choose how to boot up, and I'm going to go into one-shot UEFI boot mode, and I'm going to boot from that flash drive that I plugged in. So right here, we can see that there's this disconnected to front USB 2 flash drive, and that's what we're going to be using. We can also see right here that I've got this internal USB, which is actually what I'm going to be installing TrueNAS on. There's actually an internal USB slot that you can do this. Once again, as I said earlier, it's not the most resilient solution. However, it does allow me to have additional storage in there, and this is just my use. If I have to take down the server for a couple hours because my flash drive failed, that's not the biggest deal because it's all for me. Plus, even if your flash drive fails, all of the data is still stored on the disks. That's one of the really nice things about having the operating system and the actual storage completely separated. All right, so I'm going to boot from this USB 2, and we're going to go ahead and set it up. All right, and right here, it's going to say we're going to boot up into TrueNAS installer. So I'm going to click 1. And so while this is going through everything, I'm going to say another really nice thing about Idrac, and that's actually that you can connect virtual media. So I actually don't even need to create a flash drive image of this, as I could just click connect virtual media and have it basically connected to my computer, though it is kind of slow because it's only 100 megabit fast Ethernet connection. And so it can be really slow. So I just did this so it would take less time and show you how you would do it. All right, and so now we're in the console. So now I'm going to select 1 to install. And this is honestly really easy to use. Now it's going to go through and give you the different options. And so we can see in here that I've got 4 SSDs. And so here we can see that there's a 30 gigabyte drive in there, which is really helpful in identifying what your boot media is. So just press space to select it and click enter. And now it's going to start installing TrueNAS on that drive. So as I said earlier, I was already using this as a FreeNAS build. So it's saying, hey, do you just want to upgrade it? But we're just going to go ahead and do a fresh install. And we are going to format the boot drive to be completely brand new. And this is going to drop off all the data on the drive. And now enter a root password. And so now you need to select between UEFI and BIOS for your boot mode. Most new motherboards will support UEFI and it's a lot faster. So if you've got compatibility with it, select it. If not, BIOS should work for just about anybody still. Though Intel is talking about completely dropping off BIOS next year. So possibly new chips won't even support it. And now is the side that's actually going to take quite a while. All right, and so now it's finally installed. So it's just that easy. Basically, we're gonna go ahead and reboot it, and I'm gonna go downstairs and pull out that USB stick. All right, so I've just gone through and yanked the USB drive, and so now all that's left is that main boot media, the internal USB drive, which I've got set to be the first thing booted up. If you've not done that already, go ahead and set that up in your BIOS. So now I'm just gonna go back in and turn on the system. So as I said earlier, Idrac can be a little bit finicky, but it is booting up and I can see it all on here. And really there's not going to be a ton that we have to do here. So as we can see, it is booting up. And so we're going to go through and set it up. All right, we're going to go into the boot environment. All right, and so now it takes a little while to boot up, especially the first time, but we are all good. This is the console setup. And so we can see right here that there are a few options we can go through. And we have a web interface set up at 10.0.0.237. So this is where you're going to set up link aggregation, VLANs, and things like that. Essentially anything that has anything to do with your networking configuration. So this build has really 5 different Ethernet ports. 1 is for Idrac. 2 are just gigabit copper, and 2 are 10 gigabit SFP plus ports. So for this, I've just set up 1 of the 10 gigabit SFP, but I am going to be setting up link aggregation in future videos because it's really nice. So you may have gotten the web interface is at 0.0.0.0. That means that there's some kind of error. And make sure you've got DHCP turned on your router, or possibly set up a static IP address through the console. So what I'm going to do really quickly here is assign this TrueNAS build a static IP address from my router. So I'm just going to go ahead and log into my Unify. And I'm going to go into clients. And so right here we can see I've got this TrueNAS right here. So what we're going to want to do is go and click on it, go into settings or configuration, and under network I'm going to give it a fixed IP address of 10.0.1.50, and that's what it's going to use for DHCP. All right, and so now after a nice reboot, we should be able to go to 10.0.1.50. And boom, just like this, we've got the TrueNAS Core user interface. So use that root is your first username, And the password you set up when you were in the configuration is what you use for your first time login. And just like that, we've got it all started. It's got a, hey, this is how you do everything. So we're just gonna click get started. And just like that, we are all set up. We can see all the different network interfaces here. As I said, I've got the 4 of them that are hooked up to the FreeNAS build, TrueNAS build. We can see the CPU. I've got 2 CPUs in here. So a total of 16 threads each. Then I've also got 128 gigs of RAM here. So as you can see here, there's a section for ZFS cache, and that is actually what's going to get filled up really quickly as soon as you have any files on here. But right now, there are no pools on here, and so that's actually what we're going to have to create first. All right, so I'm going to go over future UI things, but basically this is how you can configure everything. And as I said in my last video, it takes a little bit of work and tuning. And so one of your most important things is going to be under System and Tunables. And here is where you've really got to figure out your system and do some research about what will really speed things up and add them here. I'm actually going to go through now and set up my drives, and I've already got to add one in here. Because of compatibility, my 4K SSDs are actually just going to show TrueNAS that they are 512-bit. So that means it'll take 4 times the writes to do anything. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set up a tunable here and basically tell TrueNAS to set up these drives as if they were 4K sector sizes. I'm not going to go into it too much here, but basically it's how files are actually stored. And since drives have gotten much bigger, most SSDs actually use 4K sector sizes. But that's for a whole different video and probably for somebody who knows more about this than I do. And so what it is we're going to do an A shift, and we're going to have a value of 12, because 2 to the 12 is 4,000. And the type is going to be system control, and give yourself a description. So that way you figure out what this is in 6 months when you have no idea why you did this. So we're going to click save, and that's something I have to set up before setting up these drives. And so now the last thing we're going to do on here is set up our storage. So we're just going to go into storage, and we're going to go into disks. So right now we can see that I've got 5 different disks in here, but really one of them is 29 gigabytes. That's my flash drive that is currently running the operating system. And so what we're going to want to do is create a new pool. So we're going to go into pools, add, and we're going to say create new pool. The nice thing about ZFS and TrueNAS is you can just pull in disks from an existing TrueNAS build and just import the pool, and it will work almost perfectly with no additional configuration required. But we're going to create a new pool. So as we can see right here, I've got 4 different disks here. And so I'm going to select each of them and first give it a name. I'm going to call it speed. And then I'm not going to encrypt them because personally it's going to slow it down. And I do not care if someone were to break in and steal these files and actually get them. They're just my video files. I'm posting on YouTube anyway. And we're just going to send it on over. So now it's going to suggest a layout. It's going to suggest RAID Z2, but we're going to do it as RAID Z. So I'm going to have 1 disk of fault tolerance. And now we're going to have a single VDEV here. So now I'm going to click create. And it's going to say, hey, we're going to erase all of these disks. I'm just going to click create pool. All right, and so now we have our first pool set up. We can set up compression, and that's one of the things that is really built into ZFS is inline compression. So there are different options, and we'll go through and configure them here. And this allows you to set up different options for the master, but you can also set it up for different subsets of data to have different compression on them. So it's really good so you can tune it to whatever you like. I would just leave the LZ4 as the recommended for your top one. However, different data sets will be different. And for sync, I would leave it as standard, but for my video editing, I'm actually going to set up as no sync required because everything's inline backed up and it's really just working files. Basically what sync is when to respond, yes, the data has been written to the drives. So for standard sync, it will say if the program requests that data is written to the drives before returning a good, then it will write it to the drives before returning a done. But if you set sync to never or disabled, it will return a, hey, the data has been written, even though it's not been written yet and it's still in RAM. This can mean that for certain things you could have up to 5 seconds of failure, so you would not want to do this for like a credit card transactional thing, but for something like video editing, it's really not that big of a deal, and it gives really good performance increases. If you do really need synced writes, you should look into what's called a ZIL, but that's for another video. And there's also advanced options here. And so what we're going to do is just click save. And now we've got our first pool set up. So we'll go in the dashboard and we can see that the speed pool is all up and running. All right, so that's going to be it for this video. The next one is going to be on to how to set up SMB, and then next one's going to be on users. So go ahead and leave any other TrueNAS tutorials you'd like to see me make, and have a good one. Bye.